Hello friends, welcome to the channel IT Simplified. I hope you're having good time with your family and friends. In today's session on Azure, I'm here to talk about Azure storage and Blob storage in specific. So as we all know that Microsoft Azure unlocks different storage options. There is Blob, File, Queue, Table, and all of them they offer different use case scenario. But today's session, I'm going to talk about blob storage and different tiers level and under what circumstances you can use it, and what are the couple of things that you need to keep in mind. So, talking about blob storage. So, what is blob? So, blob stands for binary large objects. It is object storage, and it is meant to store unstructured data. The data which doesn't need to have any specific structure to it. And that is where it makes it more interesting because you can use this to store maybe log files, uh, images, videos, backup data, dia data, and any on those lines you can use Azure Blob storage to store that. Now, if you look into further, there are different tiers which you can utilize within the blob storage. And as I said, that there are different case scenarios you can utilize. The three most important tiers are hot, cool, and archival. And depending upon the business requirement, you can use each of them as per your business need. For example, you will use hot tier in case you want to access the data frequently because it has higher storage cost but low transactional cost. And we're going to talk about transaction in a moment, but you will utilize in case you want to access the data frequently, so there is low transaction but the cost is higher as compared to the cool and archival. If you take the cool tier, it has lower storage cost as compared to the hot tier but high transactional cost as compared to the hot tier. So again, depending upon your business need, you can choose one or the other, but that's the major difference between the two. And then you have an archival tier which has lowest storage cost and highest transactional cost. So these are the three tiers which Azure Blob Storage unlocks. And as I said, that is what it makes it more interesting because a lot of customers, a lot of users, they're looking at Azure Storage and they can utilize all these three tiers to solve a lot of business problem because storage is one of the most expensive components we are talking about on-prem. And one of the most high consuming services in Microsoft Azure is the storage and Azure Blob Storage to be specifically. And the reason being why it is so attractive because there are different tiers level that is unlocked by utilizing blob storage. So as of right now, it is meant for storing binary large object, unstructured data in specifically the data which doesn't need to have any schema to it, and it has three tiers: hot, cool, and archival. And I talked about the transactional and the storage cost in that. Now, further looking into the blob storage. So when you create a blob storage, the hierarchy of that is that you need to create a storage account. I'm going into the architecture now. You create containers. Container will have blob, and blob will consist of blocks. That's the hierarchy of the blob storage. Now, storage account, the size of the storage account will vary from 2 petabyte to 500 terabyte depending upon the region. And if I remember correctly, the US and Europe has a limitation of 2 petabyte, and all other region including UK has a limitation of 500 terabyte. And in that storage account you can have unlimited containers, but I think that's the limitation the last time I checked. Now, because cloud is always evolving, always changing, it might change over a period of time, but I think that's what is the limitation today when I checked. So it's something to keep in mind, right? So in storage account, you will create a container. Container will have blobs, and a blob consists of blocks. Now, when you're writing the data, so talking about the transaction, so there is a write cost, right? So that's where the transaction will come into play, because when you're trying to price this out, sometimes there is a confusion also. So the commands such as you do put command, you do set tier command, that will be considered as write operation. When you change the tier from say hot to cool or cool to archive, that will be considered as a write operation. Now, when the data is written in the blob storage, as I said, that it consists of blocks, and the blocks will be in the size of 4 MB. Right? That's the way the data is written. So, say for example, if you are writing around 20 MB of data, that will be considered as five write operations. Uh, so from the cost perspective, as I said, that will come in handy, but that's the way the data is written. But all these are considered write operation when you create put command. So whenever there is a uh, you touch the storage, basically, whether it's changing the tier, you create container, you move the tier from hot to cool, cool to archive, that's all write operation, and that is how basically the uh, the write operations are computed. So for example, as I said, that for 20 MB you are talking about 5 operations, and again, depending upon how much data you can calculate, but these are all write operation. Then there is also read operation. So operations such as, again, set tier. So if you're moving the tier, say from archival to cool or archival to hot, right? Those are considered read operation. So this is also set tier 2. So basically, also you're changing the tier. So these are considered read operation. Again, I'm stressing the part on that these are all related some way or the other to the pricing, but these are all will be considered as a read operation, something to be kept in mind, right? Now, also further looking into the tiering, now you can read the data from hot and cool tier anytime, right? There is no restriction in that. But when it comes to archival, the data is always offline, because as I said, that this is meant to store data which you really want to access, maybe once in a year, or uh, and the common case scenario that I see in the user base is that a lot of health data, for example, images, X-ray images, or surveillance images, like those kind of scenario, which you just want to dump it and you want to forget it. Maybe they want to keep this for the compliance and regulatory reason, that they need to keep the data of the patient for a certain amount of time. You can keep it in archival, but the thing is that the data in archival will be always offline. In case you want to read the data, you need to change that from archival to cool, or maybe archival to hot tier. And that's where again these things about the read operations or write operation will come into play. But important thing, the data in hot and cool is always online. You can always access it. It might differ the cost, but in archival the data is always offline. In case you want to read the data, you need to change the tier to cool or maybe to a hot tier, and then you'll be able to access it. And then when you're reading it, there is a transactional cost, and when you're downloading the data, There will be also some egress charges, as we all know that putting the data inside there is no charge, but when you pull the data out, you download the data maybe on-prem, there will be a charge. So there might be, or actually there will be a charge for in case you want to download the data. Something again to keep in mind from the cost perspective. So in hot and cool, the data is always online. This also in archival tier, the data is offline, right? So these are some of the properties of that. You can also apply data lifecycle policy. Actually, before I talk about that, actually it is related to the data lifecycle policy. Now, in case you delete the data, maybe in cool tier or archival tier, so the limitation in cool tier is that if you delete the data before 30 days, then there will be a charge for that. And you can go to the Microsoft documentation and look into what is the charge. And for archival tier, that time span is 180 days. And if you delete the data before that, there will be a charge for that. So 30 days for cool and 180 days for the archival tier. For hot tier, there is no charge for retrieving the data. In that case, that's one advantage. So it you have to pay higher cost for the storage, but lower transaction or pulling the data, there is no charge. So 30 days is the cool tier and 180 days for the archival tier in case you delete the data before that, right? Something to keep in mind. And also from the data lifecycle perspective, you can create policy at the storage account level in case the data is not touched. Maybe in the last 30 days it will move to the archival tier, right? So you can also automate that processes too. So data lifecycle policies, you can apply that at the storage account, which I think will come in handy because you don't want to do that manual process. It will automatically. I always tell customers, until unless you are 100% sure, for example the way I gave it for the hospital records, that you will not be accessing maybe over an extended period of time, we can definitely keep it in the archival tier. But if you're not sure which tier you want to keep, maybe hot or cool, I will say that start with maybe a hot tier, so that the first month or 2 months you get an idea about how you want to utilize, and maybe from the cost perspective too. And then after that you can move that to a cool or an archival tier, right? And data lifecycle policy will come in handy for that. You can also automate, or you can also manually change that too. So this is what blob storage is in nutshell. It is for storing your unstructured data. It's an object storage offered by Microsoft Azure, and it has a different tier level: hot, cool, and archival. And again, depending upon what business needs or what business problem you're trying to solve, you can use one over the other. And there are different read and write operations. The way it is cost, the cost will depend upon that, and the hierarchy of that is that your storage account, container, blobs, and you have blocks in that. So this was a quick overview on Azure Blob Storage. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.